I never expected my life to shift in a single afternoon. I never expected my life to shift in a single afternoon. Yet even now, years later, I can still feel the moment my world cracked open like a door I didn't know existed. I remember standing at the top of the stairs, frozen, my palms damp, listening to my sisters whisper my name as if I were the subject of a secret experiment they had been planning for months. Maybe they had. Maybe everyone had, everyone except me. I was the adopted one, the outsider who entered their house at 12 and tried to blend in with a family who already moved like synchronized clocks. My sisters, Isla and Zoe, were only a year older, practically twins in personality. They had a way of looking at me that always felt like they saw something I didn't, like they were waiting for a version of me that hadn't formed yet. That day, I walked into the living room to find all three of them, Isla, Zoe, and Mom, waiting on the couch. Even Dad was leaning on the wall, arms crossed but eyes soft, as if bracing for something difficult yet inevitable. My first instinct was that I had done something wrong. Maybe I failed a class. Maybe they found something embarrassing in my room. But the way they all smiled made it even scarier. Mom gestured for me to sit. "We need to talk about something important," she said gently, in that tone that makes everything sound like both a crisis and a gift. Isla leaned forward, eyes bright. "We've been noticing the way you carry yourself, the way you shrink back, the way you avoid looking at yourself in the mirror." Zoe added, "You're always trying to make yourself smaller, like you're scared to take up space." I swallowed, unable to form words. They weren't wrong, but hearing someone narrate your insecurities out loud feels like being seen and misunderstood at the same time. Mom continued softly, "We love you, and we think you're holding something inside you, something heavier than any kid should have to carry alone." I felt my breath stop. I didn't know what they were hinting at, and part of me didn't want to know. Then Isla got up, walked behind me, and placed her hands on my shoulders. "We want to help you find yourself," she whispered, almost too carefully, like she was holding the first page of my life story. Zoe stood as well and reached for a small box sitting on the table. "This might feel strange, but trust us. Trust that we see something in you that you've been too scared to admit." My heart hammered so loudly, I could hear it echo in my ears. Dad finally spoke, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You're safe here. Nothing we're about to show you is meant to hurt you. This is guidance, support." Mom nodded. "And you're not being forced into anything harmful. We just want to give you the chance to explore something you've been avoiding." Zoe opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of soft blush pink fabric, a delicate ribbon, a small pair of earrings, and something that looked like the start of a new identity, even if I didn't know what identity that was supposed to be yet. Isla whispered beside my ear, "Let us help you blossom, just for a little while." I didn't know whether to run or to let myself fall. But the strangest part was that a quiet part of me, a part I had buried so deeply I forgot it existed, leaned toward the possibility. The air felt warmer around me, thicker, charged with something both terrifying and hopeful. Mom smiled gently. "We think you're meant to explore a more feminine side of yourself, and we want to guide you lovingly, slowly, safely." Something inside me cracked open. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I only whispered, "Why me?" Zoe smiled like she'd been waiting years for that question. "Because we think you've been waiting for this longer than you realize." Isla squeezed my shoulders. "Let us show you who you could be." In that moment, I didn't feel adopted. I didn't feel left out. I felt chosen for reasons I didn't yet understand. Dad stepped closer. "Just try the first step, nothing more." I stared at the pink fabric. My heartbeat felt like it was deciding my future for me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't stop it. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, something inside me shifted. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, something inside me shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first tremor before an earthquake. It was softer than anything I owned, lighter than air, as if it carried a different temperature than the rest of the room. My hand trembled without my permission, and I hated how obvious it was. Or maybe I was relieved that it was obvious. Maybe some part of me wanted them to see how shaken I was. No one rushed me. They all watched with a careful stillness, the kind that made me feel both exposed and protected. Mom moved a little closer and knelt in front of me, her eyes warm in a way that disarmed every instinct I had to pull away. "You don't have to pretend to be fearless," she murmured. "Just be honest with yourself." Honest, the word felt heavier than the fabric in my hands. Isla kneeled behind me, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. "You've never looked comfortable in the role the world gave you," she whispered. "We're just giving you room to try a different one. Not forever, just long enough to see what feels real." Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging her knees as she watched me. "We thought you might feel silly or scared. That's okay. Being unsure is part of it." Dad, leaning on the doorway, had softened even more, his posture less guarded now. "We're not pushing you into anything that defines your whole life," he said. "We just want you to see yourself without fear." Their voices blended into something almost musical, gentle, persistent, impossibly patient. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The fabric felt weightless in my lap, yet its meaning pressed against my ribs like a secret begging for breath. Mom finally said, "Try it on your wrist, just a small step." My throat tightened. I slowly lifted the ribbon between my fingers, a thin, delicate piece of blush-pink satin. Isla extended her hand, palm up, offering silent support. I placed my wrist in her hand like I was handing her a part of me I didn't understand. She tied the ribbon gently around my wrist, her movements slow and ceremonial, as though this tiny gesture meant more than any of us dared to admit aloud. When she finished, she touched the knot lightly. "There," she whispered, "just that." I stared at my wrist. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't transformative. It wasn't even glamorous. But it was real. Unexpectedly real. Something in my chest tightened with a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. I looked down at the ribbon and felt seen. Not mocked, not judged, recognized. Zoe tilted her head. "How does it feel?" I didn't know how to answer. The truth was messy. It felt wrong. It felt right. It felt terrifying. It felt like I'd opened a door and had no idea what lived on the other side. My voice cracked. "I don't know." "That's a good answer," Mom said with a soft smile. "Not knowing means you're discovering." Isla moved to sit beside me. "We want you to try something more, just the top. If it's too much, we stop." My heart jumped. The blush-pink garment waited quietly in the box, patient and persuasive. Dad stepped away from the doorway, his tone reassuring. "And we'll leave the room while you change. You control the pace." I nodded shakily. One by one, they stepped out, leaving the door slightly open, not forcing privacy but offering it. The room felt impossibly quiet. I held the garment in my hands. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple, soft top with short, fluttery sleeves and a neckline too delicate to be anything masculine. I lifted it to my face without thinking and inhaled. It smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent, like something comforting rather than alien. My hands trembled as I pulled my shirt off. My reflection in the dark window startled me, my shoulders tense, my posture uneven, my expression a storm. I slid the soft top over my head. The fabric kissed my skin with a gentleness that made me exhale sharply. It fit. Against every expectation I had, it actually fit. Not just physically, emotionally. Like something long denied had finally reached me. My heartbeat softened into something tender, unfamiliar, almost peaceful. I stood there staring at my reflection not in shock, but in recognition. A quiet voice inside me whispered, "There you are." I had no idea whose voice it was. Maybe theirs. Maybe mine. I walked slowly to the door, my breath trembling, and pushed it open. Their eyes widened, not in surprise, but in something like pride. Zoe whispered, "Oh, you look like you've been waiting for this." Isla covered her mouth, smiling through her fingers. "You look beautiful." And Mom's voice cracked when she said, "I'm so proud of you." I was shaking. But for the first time, I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking because part of me, the part I spent years burying, had finally taken its first breath. I didn't expect their smiles to make me feel even more exposed. I didn't expect their smiles to make me feel even more exposed. Their pride, their warmth, their gentle excitement, it was all too much and yet exactly what I didn't know I needed. I felt like the air had thickened, pressing softly against my skin, amplifying the sensation of the fabric on my shoulders, the ribbon around my wrist, the weight of their attention. I wanted to hide, and I wanted to stay right there in the doorway. Mom approached first, slow and intentional, like she was afraid of startling me. Her hands hovered near my arms, not touching, just offering presence. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I opened my mouth, but the only thing that came out was a trembling exhale. Isla stepped closer, her eyes sparkling with something I'd never seen directed toward me before: admiration. Genuine, almost tender admiration. "You look like you're seeing yourself for the first time," she said, her voice more observation than compliment. Zoe nodded eagerly. "I knew this would suit you. I knew it." I swallowed sharply, feeling my throat tighten. "It feels weird." Dad chuckled quietly, not mocking, just understanding. New things always do. But also, I hesitated, my fingers instinctively brushing the fluttery fabric at my sides. Something about it feels like it belongs. Saying it aloud made me dizzy. Their expressions softened into something that felt almost sacred. Mom's voice wavered slightly. "Then we're going to help you explore that, step by step, at your pace." Isla moved behind me again, gently, her presence warm and grounding. "You don't have to understand it all right now. None of us expect you to." Zoe lifted the box again, her eyes glowing with mischief and care mixed into one. "Then you won't mind if we try something else, right?" I stiffened instinctively, already overwhelmed. "Something else." She laughed softly. "Relax, nothing huge." She drew out a small hair clip, a soft pastel piece shaped like a tiny bow. Simple, innocent, gentle. But for some reason, my heartbeat spiked. Isla caught my reaction immediately and placed her hands on my shoulders, anchoring me. "Only if you want. Nothing is allowed to scare you here." Dad nodded in agreement. "You're still in control." Yet the room felt like it was waiting on my answer. The bow clip glimmered faintly in Zoe's hand, a symbol of something delicate and unfamiliar, not demanding, but quietly inviting. I stared at it, fighting against the knot of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted to run. And a small, frightened part of me whispered yes. I didn't trust my voice, so I just gave the slightest nod. Zoe lit up, stepping forward like she'd been handed a fragile treasure. "Tilt your head," she murmured. I obeyed, slowly, almost painfully slowly. Isla brushed my hair back with tender fingers, her touch unexpectedly soothing. Then Zoe slid the clip in place with a soft click that echoed in my mind like the soft latch of a long-closed door reopening. "There," she said, stepping back. "Now look." She turned me toward the hallway mirror, the one I normally avoided because I hated seeing myself at angles I couldn't control. My breath caught in my throat when I met my own reflection. The soft top, the ribbon on my wrist, the faint glimmer of the bow in my hair, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed. Not a costume, not a joke, not something forced. Something that felt like truth in disguise. I stared, unable to look away. Mom came to stand beside me in the reflection. "What do you see?" she asked quietly. My voice shook, someone softer. Isla rested her chin on my shoulder from behind. Someone more honest. Zoe took my hand gently. Someone we've always seen. My eyes burned with the threat of tears, and I blinked rapidly, not wanting to cry, not in front of them, not while wearing this, not while feeling everything all at once like a tidal wave rising inside me. Dad approached last, placing a strong, steady hand on my back. "You look comfortable," he observed, "more than I've ever seen you." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to hold all this tenderness, all this attention, all this vulnerability. I felt like I was balancing on a thin line between falling apart and finally coming together. Mom brushed my cheek with her thumb. "You're safe," she said gently. "Whatever you're feeling, let yourself feel it." The warmth of her words melted something inside me. The reflection blurred. And before I could stop myself, a single tear slid down my cheek. No one rushed to wipe it. No one mocked me. They just stayed close, breathing with me, grounding me, letting me experience the moment without shame. It was the first time I cried without feeling weak. The first time I cried and felt seen. And in that fragile, trembling silence, I realized something almost terrifying. I didn't want to take any of it off. And that scared me more than anything. The ribbon, the soft top, even the tiny pastel bow in my hair, they felt like they were holding me together, like threads stitching up places inside me I didn't even know were torn. I kept staring at my reflection, afraid that if I blinked too long the feeling would disappear. Isla noticed the way I kept swallowing hard, like I was trying to push down something too big for my chest. She stepped around me and rested a hand under my chin, lifting it slightly. "You don't have to fight the feeling," she whispered. "Let it happen." Her voice carried a confidence I didn't have. I wished I did. Mom stood behind me in the reflection, arms folded gently, her expression softening even more. "No one expects you to understand all this right away. Identity isn't a test, it's discovery." Zoe leaned against the wall, watching me with a thoughtful expression instead of her usual playful grin. "You don't look confused," she said. "You look relieved." The words hit me in a place I never let anyone touch. Relieved. Was I? Relief wasn't something I had ever associated with myself. I'd always felt like someone who was constantly bracing, shoulders tense, voice small, eyes avoiding confrontation. A guest in my own life. But standing there, dressed in softness, surrounded by warmth, I felt something I had never felt before. Like the world wasn't demanding anything from me. Like I could just be. Dad stepped forward and handed me a small towel for my face. "You're doing well," he said gently. "This is brave." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt surreal hearing him call this brave. But in some strange way, it was. Letting go, even for a moment, felt like peeling back layers I'd been taught to glue shut. Isla guided me to sit on the couch, her hands light but steady on my shoulders. "I think there's one more thing we should try," she said softly. My pulse kicked up again. One more thing. Zoe brightened slightly, though still gentle. "Just something small, symbolic." Mom nodded. "But again, only if you want it." Dad crossed his arms lightly but smiled. "If it feels like too much, we stop right away." I nodded, still unsure if I was agreeing to continue or simply unable to say anything else. Isla sat beside me as Zoe walked out of the room for a moment. The silence settled around us like a warm blanket. "You're thinking too loudly," Isla teased. I blinked. What does that even mean? She tapped her finger against my temple. "Your thoughts are practically vibrating through you. Let them breathe." I sighed shakily. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. "You're not," she said instantly. "You're finally letting yourself exist without a mask." The word mask made my heart pinch. Had I been masking this whole time? Was that why everything felt so heavy all the time? Like I'd been performing a version of myself that didn't fit. Before I could think too deeply, Zoe returned holding something behind her back. She sat on the coffee table in front of me, eyes warm and patient. "Close your eyes," she said gently. I hesitated, glancing at Isla. She nodded reassuringly. "Trust her." So I did. For the first time, I willingly shut my eyes in front of them, vulnerable, exposed, waiting. I felt Zoe's hand brush a strand of hair from my forehead. Then something light, soft, and cool rested against the top of my head. Not heavy, not overwhelming. Just gentle. "Okay," she whispered. "Open." I opened my eyes slowly. A headband. Pastel, simple, pretty, and somehow it suited me more than anything I had ever worn in my life. It framed my face, softened my features, made my reflection look like someone I didn't know, but wanted to know. Isla gasped softly. "Oh, that's perfect." Mom's voice shook. You look so at ease. Dad smiled with quiet amazement. You look happy. Happy? The words stabbed through me in a way I wasn't prepared for. My chest tightened, breath catching as my reflection blurred again. I blinked hard, but another tear escaped, sliding down my cheek with almost deliberate slowness. This time, Mom reached out and wiped it gently. Hey, she whispered, it's okay to feel joy, even if it scares you. I choked out, it doesn't feel like me. Isla moved closer, lifting my chin again. Maybe it feels like the you've been hiding. I stared at her, unable to speak. Zoe placed her hand over my heart. Does it feel wrong, or does it feel new? The distinction hit me like a quiet thunderbolt. I looked in the mirror again, the pastel headband, the soft top, the delicate ribbon. I didn't see a stranger. I didn't see someone pretending. I saw someone possible. Someone fragile, but real. Someone who looked like they could finally breathe. And for the first time in my entire life, I whispered the truth aloud. It feels new. Everyone smiled, not wide, not loud, but full of pride, full of understanding, full of love. Isla hugged me gently from the side. Then let's see where new takes you. And I nodded, not out of pressure, not out of fear, but because a small, curious spark inside me whispered. I want to know too. New didn't feel like a direction. It felt like a doorway, one I had spent years walking past without realizing it had my name carved on it. Sitting there on the couch, wearing softness that felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to know, I felt both heavier and lighter at the same time, as if parts of me were loosening and tightening all at once. Isla tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, adjusting the headband more delicately than she ever handled anything else. It suits you, she murmured. Zoe nodded, practically glowing. All of it does. Mom watched me with an expression I couldn't decipher, pride, sadness, relief, all melting together. You don't understand how long it took for you to let us in, she said quietly. I blinked. I didn't know I was keeping you out. You didn't, Dad said, stepping closer, his voice steady but soft. Sometimes we hide from ourselves so deeply that everyone else ends up standing on the outside. His words hit a part of me that no one had ever reached before. I swallowed hard. I don't know what any of this means, I whispered. That's okay, Mom said instantly. You don't need to know yet, just feel. But feeling was the problem. Feeling was the thing I had spent my whole life trying to avoid, because feelings, in my experience, always led to being misunderstood or being told to toughen up. Feelings were something I learned to treat like fragile, dangerous things. Yet now, surrounded by them and dressed in something that made every emotion sharper, I felt like my heart was finally waking up. Isla took my hands gently, examining the ribbon still tied around my wrist. Do you want to try more? She asked softly. The question made my breath hitch. More. More exploration, Zoe clarified. Not clothes, not accessories, just you. I hesitated. What does that even look like? Zoe sat cross-legged in front of me, leaning her elbows on her knees. It looks like honesty, and maybe courage. Isla nodded, and maybe accepting that there's a part of you you've been ignoring. Mom crouched in front of me, her voice softer than ever. We want you to tell us something, something small, something real. My stomach tightened. Like what? She looked up at me gently. Like what it feels like, right now, to see yourself like this. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I worried they could hear it. I stared at the floor, then at my reflection in the dark TV screen, then at the ribbon, the bow, the soft top, the headband. My throat tightened painfully. I feel, the word trembled out of me. I feel like I'm allowed to breathe differently. Isla squeezed my hand. That's beautiful. I shook my head quickly. No, it's scary. Beautiful things usually are, she whispered. Zoe leaned forward, her eyes intense but tender. What else? I pushed out another breath. I feel like I'm not pretending. Mom's eyes glistened. And how long have you felt like you were pretending before today? A long silence stretched between us. Too long. Long enough that I knew they already understood my answer before I said it. All my life, I whispered. Dad sat beside me now, his voice steadier than any of ours. Then you owe it to yourself to explore the parts of you that don't feel like pretending. I nodded slowly, my eyes damp again. I don't know where to start. Zoe smiled gently. We'll guide you. Isla stood up and extended her hand toward me. Come with us. There's something we want to show you. My pulse quickened. Where? Mom smiled mysteriously. Just a room, one you've never actually spent time in. Dad stood too, hands in his pockets. A room we've kept empty for years until now. Confusion wrapped around me like mist. Why? Zoe answered softly. Because we always thought you. Tell us who it was meant for. I froze. Isla's hand stayed extended, patient, warm. My chest tightened with a blend of dread and curiosity. And without fully understanding why. I took her hand. She squeezed gently. Good, you're ready. I wasn't sure ready was the right word. But I was sure of one thing. I wanted to know what door they were about to open. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of my sisters' footsteps that evening, light, excited, almost synchronized, as if they'd rehearsed the moment they were about to stage. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, still wearing the soft lilac house dress they'd put me in earlier, my hands nervously clasped, my breath shallow. My reflection in the mirror across the room felt like a stranger waiting for me to choose who I was going to be next. And then the door opened without a knock, like they already knew I wouldn't stop them. Myra entered first, carrying the small silver tray again, but this time it didn't have brushes or makeup palettes. It held something folded, silky, and impossibly delicate. Behind her, Zara followed with that knowing smile she wore whenever she had planned something with an almost excessive level of detail. And then, behind them both, my parents appeared in the doorway, quiet, calm, watching not with judgment, but with an unsettling kind of expectation. We're not here to overwhelm you, Mom said gently, though the atmosphere felt anything but gentle. Just continue what we started, if you're willing. Her voice was warm, but there was a firmness beneath it, a note that left me unsure whether I was agreeing or surrendering. I nodded anyway, barely managing to swallow the tightness in my throat. Zara clapped her hands once softly. Perfect. Then tonight is about presence, about how you carry yourself, not just how you look. That sentence alone made my nerves spike. I wasn't sure if she meant posture, confidence, grace, or something far more complicated. Myra laid the fabric from the tray across my lap. It was a flowing peach-colored garment, light as air, with embroidered patterns that shimmered when I touched them. This, she said, is for evening training. Training, I echoed, the word unfamiliar on my tongue. Not discipline, Zara added quickly, reading the worry in my expression. Just the kind of training where you learn to move differently, softer, more aware, more deliberate. My father stepped forward then, surprising me. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but when he did speak, it carried weight. You've always rushed through life, he said quietly. Fast steps, fast decisions, fast escapes. Maybe this will help you slow down and see yourself clearly, for once. That hit deeper than I expected. Too deep, maybe. I stood up slowly as Myra helped slide the peach garment over my shoulders. The fabric whispered against my skin, cool and smooth, like a gentle reminder that nothing about me was hidden anymore. Zara adjusted the waist, Mom stepped in to smooth the sleeves, and even Dad straightened the collar with a soft, almost hesitant touch. It felt like all of them were shaping me at once, physically, emotionally, silently, and I didn't know if I was resisting or easing into it. Walk, Zara said finally, stepping back, just to the door and back. It sounded simple. It was. The dress floated differently. My steps felt too heavy, too clumsy, too noticeable. My posture curved awkwardly, my arms didn't know where to rest, and my breath kept stuttering. But they didn't correct me with harshness. Myra came behind me, gently placing her hands on my shoulders. Lift here, she murmured, guiding me. Relax here, let your steps glide instead of land. Zara focused on my hands. Stop hiding them, let them exist. Let them be expressive, not clenched. Mom watched my face, her eyes soft. Don't look like you're waiting for permission to be yourself. And Dad, standing a little apart, said, again. So I walked, and walked again, and again. At first stiff, then embarrassed, then frustrated, then strangely lighter. There was a moment, brief, fleeting, but real, when the fabric caught the air just right, and my steps aligned with the rhythm Myra whispered into my posture, and Zara applauded under her breath, and Mom nodded with quiet pride, and Dad's expression softened. And for the first time, I felt, just for a heartbeat, like maybe the person I was becoming wasn't a stranger at all. Maybe they were someone I had been circling around my entire life, afraid to look at directly. When Zara finally told me to stop, I was breathless, not from exhaustion, but from the odd rush of discovering something I didn't have a name for yet. You did well, she said, really well. I lowered my gaze, cheeks warm. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't have to, Mom answered. You just have to be willing. And I realized I was. More than I'd ever admitted aloud. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake in the soft peach garment they'd left me in, feeling the lingering warmth of every correction, every guiding touch, every quiet word they'd spoken. My body felt different, lighter, more aware of itself, like someone had pressed a hidden switch I didn't know was inside me. But it wasn't the clothes or the posture that kept me awake. It was the way they all looked at me. Not like I was being mocked. Not like I was being punished. Not like I was being forced. But like they were seeing something I had spent my whole life ignoring. Before I could think any deeper, there was a gentle knock on my door. Not loud enough to startle me, just enough to let me know someone wasn't asking permission. They were inviting themselves in with care. It was Mom. She closed the door quietly behind her and sat beside me on the edge of the bed, her presence soft, warm, almost protective. She had a way of making even silence feel like a conversation. You looked overwhelmed tonight, she said, brushing a loose strand of hair away from my forehead. I swallowed. I guess it's a lot. It is, she agreed, but you handled it with more grace than you think. I looked down at my hands resting on the sheets, small, still trembling slightly, unsure whether they belonged to the person I used to be or the one everyone said I was becoming. Mom followed my gaze. When you were little, she said, you used to hold your hands the same way, close to your chest, as if you were afraid they'd reveal something. I tensed. Reveal what? That you're gentle. She said it without hesitation, without letting me dodge it. I'm not, I started, but she shook her head. You are, she said firmly, and somewhere along the way you learned to treat gentleness like weakness, like something to hide before anyone noticed. Her voice softened, becoming a whisper. We're not trying to change you. We're trying to stop you from hiding from yourself. Something inside me cracked at that, quietly, like a thin line drawn across glass. I didn't have a response, not one that made sense. Mom stood, walked to my dresser, and picked up the soft brush Myra had used earlier. She returned and gently patted the bed. Turn around, she said. I hesitated before sitting up and facing away from her. She began brushing my hair slowly, carefully, in long, gentle strokes that made my shoulders relax despite my racing thoughts. You don't have to be afraid of letting people care about you, she murmured behind me. Not here. Her words traveled straight through me, warm and heavy, settling somewhere deep I didn't know how to reach. After a moment she added, tomorrow your sisters want to take things a bit further. Emotionally, not anything inappropriate. I want you to be ready, to trust that this isn't a joke or a trap. It's a process. I nodded, though my chest felt tight. And if you ever want it to stop, she said, resting her hand on my shoulder, you only have to say it. We won't force you, not ever. That statement should have calmed me. Instead, it confused me. Because I realized I didn't want it to stop. Not even a little. When she finally left, I found myself sitting in the quiet darkness, hugging my knees to my chest. The room felt softer somehow, as if it was waiting for me to admit something I couldn't even form into words. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. And when morning light slipped across my bed, I woke to find Zara and Myra already standing in my doorway. Zara with a small notebook in one hand, Myra with a box wrapped in pale pink paper. Both smiling, with the kind of excitement that made my stomach flip. "Good morning," Zara said brightly. "Today we're starting the real transformation." The room suddenly felt too warm, too close, too alive. "What kind of transformation?" I asked, trying not to let my voice shake. Myra's smile deepened as she lifted the pink-wrapped box slightly. "The kind," she said softly, "that changes how you see yourself from the inside out." I woke before the sun, not because I had an alarm, not because my body insisted, but because my mind refused to rest. The soft fabric from last night, the peach top, the ribbon around my wrist, the pastel headband, still clung to me like tiny threads stitching me into someone I didn't yet know how to name. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the house waking around me. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint clatter of a tray, the gentle scraping of forks. My sisters, my parents, orchestrating their morning like a calm storm I had learned to fear and crave all at once. I wasn't sure which. By the time I slid out of bed, my feet softly brushing the floor, they were all waiting. Zara in the corner, notebook in hand, Myra with a small basket of garments, Mom leaning against the doorway, Dad standing tall but quietly watching, his hands tucked into his pockets. Their eyes weren't impatient or demanding. They were patient, expectant, almost reverent. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Good morning," Zara said, her smile gentle but sharp, as if she had rehearsed the exact way to hold my attention without overwhelming me. "Ready to continue?" I hesitated. "I think so." "Good," Myra said softly, stepping forward and placing the basket at my feet. "Today is about layers, not clothing. Layers of you, how you move, how you feel, how you hold yourself when you think no one is watching." I stared at the basket. Inside were more delicate fabrics, soft blouses, ribbons, skirts, even a pair of slippers that looked impossibly small but somehow promised comfort. Each piece felt like it carried a story I wasn't yet allowed to read, a promise I wasn't sure I could trust. Zara approached and crouched in front of me. "The first layer," she said, pulling a pale lavender blouse from the basket, "is awareness, not just of your body but of the way you inhabit it." I nodded slowly, though I had no idea what that really meant. She held the blouse out, delicate, almost fragile. The fabric shimmered faintly in the morning light. I lifted it with trembling hands, the weight lighter than air but somehow heavier in my chest. Myra guided me to stand. "Slowly, don't just put it on, feel it. Let it settle on you not as something you wear but as something that exists with you." I did as she instructed. My fingers traced the seams, I inhaled, I hesitated, and then I slid it over my head. The blouse kissed my shoulders softly, like a promise rather than an obligation. I reached for the mirror, dreading the reflection. But when I looked, I didn't see the timid, shrinking person I'd known all my life. I saw someone fragile, yes, but deliberate. Someone who could exist without apology, someone who could inhabit the world without fear of judgment. My heart hammered in a strange rhythm, part terror, part exhilaration. Zara whispered beside me, "You're doing this beautifully." I blinked rapidly. "I don't feel beautiful." "Not yet," she said. "You feel real, and real is the first step." Mom moved behind me, brushing my hair gently back. "You've always hidden," she murmured. "Today is the day you stop hiding, even a little." The day stretched long. Step by step, layer by layer, they guided me. A ribbon tied softly around my wrist, a skirt that swirled lightly with every movement, a pastel sash that emphasized my posture, slippers that made my steps silent but deliberate. Each addition was small, innocuous even, but together they began to shape not just how I looked, but how I felt. At one point, Dad came closer and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Walk to the window," he said quietly. "Look outside and see yourself moving in the world, not hiding from it." I obeyed, trembling, each step a negotiation with fear and wonder. The morning light streamed across my reflection in the glass, and for the first time I felt that strange, fleeting clarity. The person looking back at me wasn't pretending. They were breathing, alive, unapologetically present. They watched me like I was fragile crystal, and maybe I was, but their reverence didn't crush me. It held me, balanced me, made me realize that safety didn't mean stillness. Then Zara handed me her notebook. Inside were drawings, gestures, steps, subtle movements that I had never noticed in myself. How to hold hands, how to lift a chin, how to stand so the world could see me without fear. She said softly, "It's not instructions, it's suggestions. Let yourself explore them." I traced the lines with my fingers, a shiver running through me. Each mark felt like a roadmap towards someone I didn't yet know how to be, but desperately wanted to discover. Hours passed. I don't know how many. Time lost meaning. Lunch was a quiet, shared ritual, punctuated by gentle guidance and soft encouragement. Every glance, every gesture, every small correction felt monumental. My posture shifted, my steps changed, my reflection became someone I could finally imagine as me. By late afternoon, Myra had introduced the final piece, a soft shawl draped across my shoulders. "This is about presence," she said. "Not decoration, presence. Own the space you take, it's yours." I wrapped it around me, feeling the weight, the texture, the subtle warmth it carried. I looked in the mirror, slowly turning, adjusting, noticing the way my hair fell, the way the ribbons framed my wrist, the way the soft shawl accentuated my shoulders. And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the person staring back. I saw me. Not timid, not hiding, not apologetic. Just me. Tears came unbidden. This time they weren't shame. They weren't fear. They weren't embarrassment. They were relief. They were acknowledgement. They were the quiet, astonishing realization that after years of folding myself into corners, shrinking from attention, avoiding mirrors, and questioning my worth, someone, no, everyone, had helped me unfold. Piece by piece, layer by layer, breath by breath. When the day finally ended, they all stood around me, quiet and proud, not with words, not with judgment, but with the shared understanding of what had been accomplished. Zara whispered, "This isn't the end, but it's the beginning of knowing yourself fully." Mom added, "And no matter where you go from here, you carry today inside you, this strength, this honesty." Isla simply held my hands and said, "I think you already know. You are allowed to exist, fully and beautifully, in your own skin." I realized in that moment that the soft garments, the ribbons, the pastel shawl, they weren't just clothing. They were symbols. Symbols of trust, patience, love, and the courage to face myself. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer shrinking. I was standing, fully present, fully seen, fully me. And I knew, deep in my chest, with a warmth I had never felt before, that I would never be the same again. For the first time in my life, I smiled at my reflection and didn't recognize fear there at all. I only recognized possibility.